This is from the scripture of Luke, shortly after the birth of Jesus, when they bring the child Jesus to the temple for the presentation. It says, "Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was upon him, and it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord, the Christ. And Simeon came, motivated by the Spirit, into the temple. And when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, Simeon took the child in his arms, and looking up to heaven, blessed God and said, 'Lord, now you may dismiss your servant in peace, according to your word. For mine eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all the people a light for the revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel.' And his father and mother marveled at what was said about the child, and Simeon blessed them." Thank you for being with us. I'm Father Jerry Bowen, pastor at St. John's in Columbia. Welcome. As a priest, I would often hear people say something like, "When I get to heaven, I'm going to have a couple of questions for God." One older priest once told me, yes, we all will, but it will only be one question and the same question. It'll be, "Can I come in?" Father Ron Rollhauser says something that very much stuck with me, because it was the experience I had when we were growing up in the 50s in the Catholic culture. He says, in the Roman Catholic culture in which he grew up, we were taught to pray for a happy death. For many Catholics at the time, this was a standard petition within their daily prayer. "And may I pray for the grace of a happy death." But how can one die happy? Isn't the death process itself excruciating? What about the pain involved in dying and letting go of this life and saying our last goodbyes? Is it possible one can imagine to die happy? But the vision here, of course, was religious. A happy death meant that one died in good moral circumstances. That meant that you didn't die in some compromised situation, a state of sin, alienated from God. You didn't die bitter or away from the church, angry at your family, and not least, you didn't die from suicide, drug, or alcohol overdose, or engage in some criminal activity. Death is obviously a controversial topic. People don't like to talk about it in detail, but we should. It's important to speak honestly and transparently about what kind of death each of us would prefer. Although many individuals shy away from contemplating the inevitability of death, most of us would agree that we would like to die well. A new review of existing literature published in the American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry asks, what makes a good death? According to those involved in the process, certain organizations have attempted to sum up the principles of what it means to die well. According to an Institute of Medicine report, a good death is, and I quote, "free from avoidable distress and suffering for patient, family, and caregivers, in general accord with the patient's and family's wishes, and reasonably consistent with clinical, cultural, and ethical standards." Sometimes as part of the planning, I may hear someone say, "If I die." Well, the proper phrase, I think, is not "if I die," but "when I die." This is just part of our inability and being uncomfortable with this conversation to really address it. Here is what a woman said when she had been informed of her cancer. This was from June 19th of last year. When Beth Wood's cancer returned in 2014 after 20 years of remission, she made an instant choice. She said no chemotherapy, radiation, or other life-altering treatments that could only stave off the inevitable. She told her husband so much in the same breath as informing him the cancer was back, after what was supposed to be a routine visit to the doctor when she had been clear of cancer for so many years. So she made a decision to say, "I'm not going back through that again. I want quality of life, not quantity." As her husband said, David Wood of Tennessee, and we were given almost 3 more years. Well, in that time, they traveled the country. They spent the final Christmas with the children and grandchildren. And when she died at the age of 65 on December 29, 2016, it was peaceful, at home. with Beth secure in her faith that she was going to a better place. It was, said David, her widower, a good death, free from avoidable distress and suffering for patient, family, and caregivers, in general accord with the patient's and family's wishes, and reasonably consistent with clinical, cultural, and ethical standards. Taking into account the inevitability of death, not if, but when, it is vital that we have these conversations with ourselves and our loved ones now, so that when the time comes, we may greet our final days in peace and bestow that peace as a lasting blessing for those we love. Like Simeon, now, Master, you may dismiss your servant in peace. May God bless you as you begin these conversations, and thank you for coming.
Hello, my name is Audrey Marsh. I'm the lead of the Gift of Peace program or ministry at St. John the Evangelist Roman Catholic Church in Columbia, Maryland. A few years ago, I was presented with a wonderful gift, and it was the opportunity to lead the Gift of Peace ministry in our church. There'll be a little more about that later. If you are participating in this discussion, you've heard about our program, or you could even be here against your will. We've heard my wife made me do it many times. Whatever the reason, we believe you will leave with not only a willingness to be open to family members, but happy that you participated. Let's start with some background from the person who started this movement, Ellen Goodman.
I started the Conversation Project while I was going through my mother's own last years, months, days of life. We had never talked about her wishes for end-of-life care. From time to time, she would say something like, if I'm ever like that, pull the plug. But of course, when she became ill, there was no plug to pull. And also, my mother had dementia at the end, so we were not able to have any conversation about what her wishes were. So I was her healthcare decision maker, and in the last months, years really, I had a cascading number of decisions to make for which I assure you I was totally unprepared and in fact blindsided. What I learned from the experience of talking about my mother's end of life is that guess what? This experience is far too common. Far too many of the people we love are not dying in the way that they would choose. Far too many of their survivors are left guilty, depressed, uncertain about whether they have done the right thing. 70% of people say they want to die at home, and 70% of people are dying in hospitals and institutions. That's just a huge disconnect between what people wish and what happens. We can change that. That's why the Conversation Project emphasizes having a talk about values, about what matters to you, not what's the matter with you, but what matters to you and what's important for you to think about at the end of their life. Are you a person who wants all the information, or do you want just enough? Are you someone who is going to make all decisions for yourself, or do you want your family to be involved? What's important to you at the end of life? Then you've given them a real staff, a guide. We started the Conversation Project with just a small group of people around a table. When we sat down, we brought in experts in the field, and it was the experts in the field who told us that if we're going to change the way people die in America, we have to go outside the medical system and change the cultural norm from not talking about what we wanted at the end of life to talking about it. One of the things that the conversation does is tell your parents that you're going to be there for them, that you're not going to leave them isolated in the hands of strictly medical people. The medical community is just beginning to be conversation ready. A generation ago, we transformed how people were born. It was not the medical profession that said, come into the hospital with your video camera, let's have a baby in a bathtub, and don't all the husbands want to come into the birthing room? It was not, I assure you. Birth is a human experience, not just a medical experience. And part of what we're doing in talking with people is recapturing and saying, dying is part of the human experience. It's part of a natural progression in life. We have the capacity to transform how people die in this country. I think everybody does have an idea of what a good death would be. When you ask people, the word that comes up the most is peaceful. The Conversation Project is very much about connecting. It's about sharing, and it's about being open and loving to each other through a very difficult journey.
So now you know the why of the Conversation Project. The Speakeasy Howard campaign is an initiative in Howard County that helps residents think through their preferences for care and talk about them with loved ones and name a healthcare agent. That's the person who will speak for you if you can't speak for yourself. The Horizon Foundation is leading the campaign along with many community partners, and St. John's has been a partner since the pilot year with other churches and health organizations. We knew we were onto something when we had over 900 seats filled across 5 events. We added panel discussions to the workshop that year and speakers on related topics over the next 2 years. Videos of those presentations are available in our Interfaith Library. This year, we are expanding to reach those in our parish and community who want to facilitate small groups and family discussions. Once again, with these videos, we are trying something new. The topic is a passion for me based on my own personal experiences. And the ministry itself has been giving back to me over the last several years through the program, the people, and the stories shared. It's customary in our program to share personal stories, and you'll hear each of our 3 presenters tell you their personal stories. Mine begins years ago with my death of my parents. I was unprepared. No one considered these discussions at that time. My dad had cancer. The doctors knew that he couldn't survive more than a few weeks, but they recommended surgery. He knew it was useless, and he said, okay, it might help others, but no resuscitation. No, do not resuscitate. Those were his express wishes. When he came out of surgery against his wishes, they had put him on life support. Once on life support, it was the rule of the hospital that you had to stay on life support until you could support yourself, that your body was strong enough. So he spent a week on life support, intubated, trying to tear tubes out constantly. And then he spent another week dying a slow, painful death from cancer. He spent that time in pain. He spent that time miserable, and his wishes weren't honored. My mother had dementia. We never had discussions. And based on her condition at the time of her death, we were fortunate that she was in a Catholic nursing home that didn't believe in intervention. But I'm still haunted by that death because of her communication skills. We never had the opportunity to talk. And I had to work with the nursing home on her end of life without her participation. If I had just had that conversation, I would have been a much happier person today about that death. My brother-in-law is a lawyer, so when my mother-in-law developed cancer, all of her paperwork was completely in order. She had her advance directive, she had her will, she had her health agent named, and both hospitals were hand-delivered copies of that paperwork. She was living in an assisted care, but she was at our homes a lot. So it would be one or the other hospital we knew. When she was taken by ambulance to the one hospital, we get there, we're all running from work and from different places around the state, and we're told they put her on, they intubated her because they couldn't find the advance directive. They couldn't find the health agent paperwork, so we couldn't even tell them what she wanted. And we didn't know at the time. You could not plan on that paperwork being in place. You had to carry it with you. It had to be there when the paramedics picked her up, because if you didn't have it there, the hospital was going to do everything they could to save her. They knew she would die that night. They told us that she would not wake up, but at the same time, they intubated her until she could survive on her own for about a minute, and then they took the tube out and she died within an hour. This is why I'm here. I don't want other families to go through this type of pain and suffering, whether during or after a family member's death. This was a gift to me because I, in this program, can possibly prevent these stories from happening to other people. For this point in time, we want you to consider your memories of a good death or a difficult death. What went right? What went wrong? And keep these in mind as we proceed in this program. This workshop kit is not meant to be finished today or in one sitting. What we're offering today is a beginning, an introduction into the kit, and a discussion on how to use it and how to proceed, and we'll be giving you the opportunity to continue that at home. The answers that you will provide are based on a Likert scale. There is no right or wrong, and it's specifically based on how you feel at this moment in time. We're not asking how you think you should feel when you're in your 80s and you're only 50. We're asking you to think about this point in time, whether you are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80. It doesn't matter. Take your time, read, and reflect. This video is timed to last about 2 hours, and you can stop or start as you wish when you need more or less time. Music is provided for quiet reflection periods.
Hello, my name is Joe Schaefer, and I've been a part of this parish for 47 years. And in that time, I've seen a lot of things happen in terms of programs, and I would say that this program that we're involved with today is one of the best. I think it's very good because it involves our personal experience, who we are, and what happens to us. We are talking about the mystery of death and how each one of us experiences that when it occurs to others around us and when it happens in us. In my own background, which was an ethnic community in Baltimore, death was a familiar thing. I remember my relatives dying. I remember being at wakes that happened in homes. And it was not something that was strange and foreign. But as we move down the years and come into today, death is something that occurs in the news, and it's about other people. And we see it often, but it's in war and in killings, it's in famine, and all accidents and all kinds of things, but it's not personal, so everybody can talk about death. However, when it gets personal, when it gets close, you will notice that in our society, we don't talk about death. We use euphemisms. We say somebody's passed on, somebody's gone to the other side, they're no longer with us. This program is to help us to deal with that. Several years ago, my wife, Pat, died. She had a reoccurrence after 8 years of her breast cancer, and it was a death sentence for her. We had discussed it. We had discussed it around the table. We had discussed it with our children. It was a difficult time for us, but it was also a joyful celebration because we were prepared. We were prepared, first of all, by our faith. We believe. We believe in the resurrection. We believe in life everlasting. And that was one bulwark for her. The other was that we had had conversations about it. In our experience, we had prepared our wills like most people do. But we also had other things. We had appointed our healthcare agent, and we had our final health directives. And our conversations around the table were included in those kinds of things with our kids. And I've had people ask me, how do you bring this subject up with kids? How do you talk about death, your own death, or somebody else's death with your children? And I found that very easy. We see in the news people who are famous who have died. Remember John McCain? John McCain was prepared for his death, and he let us know it. He had his directives, and he had informed people around him how he wanted to die. You remember the stories about Chuck Berry and Prince, two famous people whose deaths were recorded, and what happened to them. The EMTs showed up and resuscitated them and dragged them off to the hospital, and we knew nothing about what their wishes were or how they wanted to die. When Pat died, I was summoned to the hospital. The hospital already had her directives. And I walked in. I had expected to pick her up and take her home because she was in there for a procedure. And the doctor told me the only thing keeping her alive is intubation and blood pressure medication. What do you want us to do for you? They had the directives and they knew it was my choice. And so I said, how long can you keep her alive? Can you keep her alive till my kids get here? That's what she wanted. And they did. They kept the blood pressure medication going. I remember the last one of my children to arrive was my son, who came after about 4 hours. And he walked in and he gave her a hug and he said, "Mom, can you hear me?" And she said she couldn't speak. And she blinked her eyebrows. And that was a yes. Up was yes and down was no. So we sat there for the next several hours alongside her bed. She couldn't communicate with us. But we told stories, and we laughed, and we joked, and we talked to her, and we talked to each other. One of the things in our directives was that had been put in there by our lawyer was an item about music that said if we're ever in this kind of condition, we should have music played, soft music in the background, like Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart. And I mentioned this to my kid, and I said, if we do that, Mom will kill us. My daughter pulled out her Pandora, put on rock and roll. The first song was Stairway to Heaven. So we laughed and we joked and we talked to her and talked to each other for the next 3 hours until her blood pressure just dropped off the chart and she died. For us, it was very sad, but it was a joyful event. It was not a sad death. It was good for us that we had been prepared that way. Part of this program is to help you to get into that same kind of a mood. Not that death is something that you welcome or a happy thing, but that you're prepared for it. And that's what this program is all about, and we hope that you take advantage of it. And now as we get into the rest of this program, we ask you to look at your book and we have a time of quiet reflection. Please fill out the top box on page 3 about what matters most to you, and then answer the questions through the first box on page 4. Please stop after writing in that first box on page 4. Now please turn to the partner that you were sharing with earlier, or with a family member, a loved one, and take 6 minutes to discuss what you both answered in the box on top of page 4 about what role you want to have in the decision making. Please answer to the next 3 questions and fill out the box on the bottom of page 4. And then please stop writing after you fill out that box. Please turn to the partner or family member that you were speaking with before and take about 8 minutes to discuss what you both answered in that box at the bottom of page 4 about what kind of care you want to receive. depending on the size of your group, ask for 1 or 2 volunteers from each table to please take just about a minute to address your table group and share an insight, surprise, challenge, or a feeling that came up for you from this box or from any of your discussions so far.
Hello, my name is Eileen Kiefer. I've been a member of St. John's Parish for 42 years and have been a member of this team since the program started. I would like to share an experience I had with a friend of mine a few years ago. She was deciding what to do if she or someone else was faced with a decision about her end-of-life care. Sue was a heavy smoker and did not see herself quitting despite constant requests from her husband, sons, and friends. Another friend of hers, Mary, who was a nurse, and I sat with Sue and her husband to explain the need to put her wishes in writing. And in fact, her husband decided at that time to also fill the form out. As we were going through the forms to be completed, Sue identified two people that she wanted to be those decision makers, her husband and me. Her husband became upset that she named me as the second person and not their oldest son, who lives out of state. Her husband felt that the two people should be family. She felt that the two people should be people she trusted to do what she wanted done. They sat there and had a conversation they never expected to have. Mary and I offered to leave, but they both wanted us to stay in case they had questions. So Mary and I sat and listened as they had this very difficult talk. The husband really felt that they both have the same directions of what they wanted done and that the two people named be family. I tried to point out that their wishes be what each believe is what is going to bring them comfort at a very difficult time. As a close friend, I was able to point out how they each have had different approaches to issues over the years. He understood what I was saying and eventually respected her choice. Of course, as we went through this process, the assumption was that she would die before him. She was admitted to the hospital often. Each time her breathing labored and her stay was longer. It was a surprise to all of us that he died very suddenly before her, and his wishes were honored. Later, I spoke to Sue and her son about updating her wishes. She said, "Well, you're still on the paper, so it's you." I said, "That's fine, but don't you want to add your son to the form?" He looked at me and said, "I trust you." And I said, "That's all okay, but I want you to know that number one, I will not do anything until I talk to you. But also, more importantly, you should be on that form in case I'm not available and not there when time comes." This family and my family were very close. In fact, even after their parents' deaths, we are still close to their sons. There were moments when the discussion was uncomfortable, but because of our long and close relationship, there was always trust. Please turn to top of page 5 and answer the first 3 questions at the top of the page, then fill in box on what role you want your loved ones to have. Stop after the box on page 5. Please turn to your partner and take 5 minutes to discuss what you both answered in the box on page 5, including the second question about whether your loved ones know what you want and the role you want them to play, or whether they have no idea. Please turn to the bottom of page 5 and answer the question about what are the 3 most important things to you about your end-of-life care that you want others to know. Look up when you're finished. Please take 8 minutes to turn to your partner and discuss what you both listed as most important to you. Please turn to page 6 and answer for yourself in quiet reflection the questions about the specifics of your conversation: the who, when, where, and what. Look up when finished. Please read the next 2 pages, 7 and 8, that offer suggestions on how to introduce the conversation with your loved ones. Please circle any suggestions you may find helpful. Look up when finished. Please turn to page 2 and fill in top boxes that help identify any additional matters you may wish to think about or take care of before you have the conversation. Then please finish reading the rest of page 2 about what might be helpful to remember before you have the conversation.
So note the instructions are to answer the way you feel now. We've been mentioning that throughout the program. That's because our wishes, our views on death change over time and under different circumstances. What's the most important takeaway today? Identify your healthcare agent and let that person know that you've named them as a healthcare agent. Ensure the person you choose is prepared to make those decisions for you. There are some excellent resources on the Conversation Project and the Speakeasy websites about choosing a health agent. Make sure they can follow your wishes. Don't just name them. Talk to them and ask if they are prepared to make the tough decisions. This may not be a family member. It's your choice. It does not have to be a family member, as you heard from Eileen earlier today. Now I'm going to read a letter that a woman wrote to her children, and it's a beautiful letter, and it expresses exactly what we're trying to get through to you when it concerns your health agent. Don't panic, it's okay. A letter to my family by Karen Boudreau, MD. If you are faced with a decision that you're not ready for, it's okay. I'll try to let you know what I would want for various circumstances. But if you come to something we haven't anticipated, it's okay. And if you come to a decision point and what you decide results in my death, it's okay. You don't need to worry that you've caused my death. You haven't. I will die because of my illness or my body's failing or whatever. You don't need to feel responsible. Forgiveness is not required, but if you feel bad, responsible, or guilty, first of all, don't, and second of all, you are loved and forgiven. If you're faced with a snap decision, don't panic. Choose comfort, choose home, choose less intervention. Choose to be together at my side, holding my hand, singing, laughing, loving, celebrating, and carrying on. I will keep loving you and watching you and being proud of you. If we could all be that prepared, it would be wonderful. If you don't already have advance directives, you can use the form in the back of the booklet and follow the instructions. Advance directives do not require a lawyer, but they do require witnesses. MyDirectives.com is the website where you can safely upload your documents and name that agent. You can access them directly or through the Speakeasy Howard website. You provide access to those you choose, and then your family and healthcare agent can access them from their phones when needed. After you have that conversation, please look at step 4 in the back of the book, page 9, called Keep Going. We hope you found this presentation to be the perfect start to your journey.